tonight he's coming from Denver. So I'm very happy that both Donna and Matthew are here tonight to talk about this issue because it's very important.
Thank you, Maris. Really appreciate the introduction, and I want to actually thank you because your support for Rebuilding Alliance over the years has been incredibly inspirational. So thanks for inviting us here, and thanks to WILPF for having us here. I have a little bit of a history with WILPF. Actually, I had been telling Maris before. My mother was a longtime WILPF member and founded the Middle East Steering Committee in the Fresno, California WILPF branch. And my sister, after getting her MA in Peace and Justice Studies, went on to intern at WILPF in Geneva, Switzerland, and also in Beirut, Lebanon. So we've kind of have a lot of family involvement with WILPF. So it was really an honor to be able to speak to you all tonight. So glad to be here. I can go ahead and start my screen share and get into the content of the presentation here. So as Maris said, and as Laura said, the issue that we are going to be speaking about tonight is related to the government of Israel restricting Americans' access to Palestine. And we've recently launched what we call Contact Congress campaigns, this one being called Ensure Americans' Fair Entry to Palestine. In these campaigns, we garner public support and organize around an issue to engage with various congressional offices to push for the changes we wish to see. And this one is all centered around ensuring Americans' fair entry to Palestine. Maris touched a little bit on Rebuilding Alliance, but a little bit more of our background. We're a 501c3 from California, founded in Redwood City by Donna Bransky-Walker, who's here with us. As Maris said earlier, one of the original goals of the organization was to rebuild the family home in Gaza of the Nasrallah family that Rachel Corrie stood to protect. And then we were involved in the West Bank in building a kindergarten that would not be demolished, essentially building a school in the West Bank that would not get a demolition order and would not be demolished. And that school is in a tiny village in the northern West Bank called Al-Aqaba. And that's where we've been heavily involved since then, taking on home construction projects and doing advocacy there. And the kindergarten is still standing to this day. And Donna and I were both just over there last month. So that's a little bit about how we were founded and what we've been doing. And obviously since then, we've taken on a lot of different types of work. This campaign is part of our advocacy work. We also do direct aid, empowerment, and things like that. So just to get into a little bit of what we're going to be talking about, starting with the problem and the issue at hand. Essentially, the issue is that in preparation for Israel entering the American Visa Waiver Program, which is a program and an agreement that the United States works out with various countries to essentially have our citizens travel visa-free to another country, and then that's reciprocated so that, let's say, if I want to travel to France, I can, or Israel now, I can just get on a plane, go there, and I get a visa when I show up. And so that's what Israel's attempting to agree to with the United States, is that their citizens will be able to travel to America freely without a visa. But in preparation for that entry into our program, as we're evaluating Israel, the government of Israel has carved out exceptions to their entry requirements that really codify discrimination against Americans who are trying to travel to Palestine and Israel. So it's important to note that what's happened is the government of Israel has published a procedure that was previously unwritten, but has essentially been in effect for 10 or 15 years, It just hasn't been written down on paper, and now we're kind of finally seeing the actual documents that say exactly what it is that is going to be restricted in terms of entering Israel and the West Bank. The procedures were published originally in February. Their implementation was delayed to September, and now currently to October 20th. That's being published by what's called the Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories, which is essentially it's a civil arm of the Ministry of Defense that's responsible for activities in the Palestinian territories that are under military occupation. And essentially what the procedure will do is restrict access for Americans of Palestinian and Arab descent. So those will be specific groups that are and will continue to be discriminated against, but also a whole host of other people, grandparents, academics, students, business people, volunteers, doctors. They would all fall under a really specific set of restrictions that will make travel there difficult and will really do great harm to civil society in Palestine and to family life and things like that. There's a lot of very specific and alarming restrictions. One of them you'll see on the bottom of the screen is that second degree relatives, we're talking about grandparents, are not going to be allowed to visit the West Bank except under exceptional circumstances and with a 45-day advance application. Maris briefly noted in the introduction that we've just recently taken two groups of congressional staff to Israel and Palestine on staff delegations, in which we're there to show them the reality of what's happening, really to show them what we're seeing in order to affect some sort of change. And when we were there, we met with a group in Ramallah in the West Bank called the Right to Enter. And that group is comprised of volunteers, a lot of them Americans living in Palestine. And they had a lot of really, remarkable stories about the things they've been facing living there and trying to travel there. And, some people talked about how their children who, live with them in Palestine have never seen their grandmother or their grandfather because they don't know if they can leave and if they'll be able to get back into their, their home country, if they'll be able to return to the West Bank. And their mother or father, the grandparents, can't necessarily travel to the West Bank, especially now with these new restrictions, because they won't necessarily get in. So that's a little bit about the problem we're talking about. And I'm happy to answer any questions along the way. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask me to clarify or anything like that. So just to get into a little bit of the approach that Rebuilding Alliance is taking with this, essentially what I previously described as the visa waiver program, that evaluation process that the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department are doing presents a little bit of a moment of opportunity for us to engage on that issue, because Israel's attempting to gain entry into the visa waiver program. And now it's time for us to speak out and say, well, hold on, if they're going to be able to travel freely to the United States, then that needs to be reciprocated, and Americans should not be discriminated against when traveling to Israel and Palestine. So the Rebuilding Alliance approach, and this is an approach we take on a whole host of issues, is first we engage constituents, ideally to reach out to all 535 senators or representatives, and on this issue, pressing them, to ensure fair entry for Americans. Our goal is 10,000 emails to Congress. It's a big goal, but that's what we're aiming for. We really think that constituent engagement is a key to seeing action from these offices. And the other big component of what we do is we organize and schedule Zoom briefings with congressional offices. So sort of similar to what we're seeing tonight. And we talk about the issues that we're advocating for. 30 so far in the last couple of weeks, we've done with both Republican and Democrat offices, and at least 30 more scheduled for the coming month. We really have a great team of folks on our advocacy team that are working really hard on this issue. And what we do is we reach out to experts, guest speakers, human rights advocates, and then also people that are affected by these issues to join us in the briefings and talk a little bit about what's been happening to them. And we always invite constituents because their presence there, it really is key. And then the other thing that you'll see a little bit later on is we write a letter to congressional offices that our supporters, so constituents of those offices, would send out seeking a reply from their office. And then the last thing that we like to do is partner with sister organizations to multiply the impact. So if we're engaging on a certain issue, we reach out to other groups that are engaging on similar issues, and we partner with them so that we make sure that we're, working together and multiplying our effort and our impact and kind of dealing with the same issue. We should be working together and not, and really be unified in our approach. So that's our approach. And this picture is a Rebuilding Alliance staff member. It's one of our colleagues. She was, if you can see, the arrow there points to a stamp that she received at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport. Says entry denied. She's Palestinian American, but she was not born in Palestine. She was born in the U.S. Her only citizenship is American. Her only passport is a U.S. passport. But she's sort of an example of what we're talking about when we talk about specifically Americans of Palestinian and Arab descent facing discrimination when attempting to enter Israel and Palestine. And this is specifically what we're talking about when we say that the entry has to be reciprocated. American entry to Israel has to be reciprocated with the visa waiver program, and it currently is not. The benefit of what we're trying to do is to ensure that all Americans of all backgrounds can access these places. And also to push the American embassy, the U.S. State Department, to assist Americans who are being discriminated against, and to get Congress to assist their constituents who are facing discrimination. One of the other visits that we had when we were with congressional staff in the West Bank was at the U.S. State Department, and we brought this issue up. And kind of asked about the engagement that they're having on it. We didn't get very, very positive feedback or very open feedback, but when we spoke with constituents and Americans with the Right to Enter campaign that are affected by these things, they really spoke a lot about how they really have no access to citizen services in the West Bank because the U.S. Embassy is now in Jerusalem. There is no way for them to travel to Jerusalem without a permit. Many of them, and they won't receive a permit essentially to travel to Jerusalem in Israel. So they're faced with the choice of living illegally in the West Bank if they're there with family, or traveling illegally to Israel to attempt to access the U.S. Embassy. And so the issue of the American government not providing services to its citizens abroad is also really unacceptable, and was probably one of the single most powerful issues that were presented to our congressional staff delegation. Even the Republican members on the delegation were really dismayed at the lack of government assistance that Americans are being provided abroad. Going on with our approach and our strategy, this approach is consistent with all of our campaigns. We like to say that we ask Congress to do the simplest things possible. So we typically ask for 2 phone calls. This is on behalf of their constituents, and this is why it really helps to have constituents engaged, so that these calls they're making are for their constituents that they're supposed to be assisting. We always tell the staff and the members of Congress that the calls can be private or public, because oftentimes when dealing with with Israel or with these issues, there's a sense that people don't want to be too public about what they're doing. And so it's fine on our end. Private calls are okay. Ask for information, express concern, and urge action, on whatever the issue is that we're advocating. And so the next slides will show you a little more specific about what our strategy is and what we'd like to see happen when we talk to Congress. So the first call we ask them to make is to the State Department. Oftentimes we hear from people at the State Department, officials at the State Department, that at a certain level, they're blocked from raising issues to their higher ups. But when Congress engages and Congress gets involved, it gives them the leverage or the ability to raise these issues up the chain. So that congressional engagement really does help on these issues. We're asking them to intervene on behalf of US citizens experiencing discrimination at all ports of entry controlled by Israel. And then, as we discussed earlier, because reciprocity is required by law as part of the US visa waiver program, we're requesting the State Department to open a hotline for impacted Americans to publish a monthly tally of those refused. One of the things that really struck me particularly, was it seems difficult to evaluate Israel for the visa waiver program, as one of the aspects of that is if they're handling things in a certain way, if they're being reciprocal with American citizens. But if the US government isn't tracking American citizens that are not being treated fairly when attempting to access Israel, we really don't have a fair mechanism for evaluating whether or not they should be in the visa waiver program. So that's another one of our asks. The final ask there is that the regulations that we just touched on a little bit, published by CODOT for the West Bank, should be consistent with what America requires for our citizens. So it's not enough to consider what Israel is doing with their new restrictions. There needs to be assurance that what Israel is implementing meets those requirements that we have. And just to be clear on this, is that we're not advocating necessarily that Israel is refused entry into the visa waiver program. What we're advocating for is for a fair and reciprocal access to Israel and Palestine for US citizens, regardless of background and free of discrimination. So that's really what we're advocating for. Take a quick drink of water here. And the second call that we ask congressional offices to make is to the Israeli embassy, asking the government of Israel to, in this case, repeal the procedure for entry and residence of foreigners in the Judea and Samaria area. And that kind of sounds like a mouthful. Well, it is, but that is the name of the procedure that they've published. Judea and Samaria, of course, being the biblical name for the West Bank. And we're asking them to do so because it, of course, infringes on the rights of US citizens. And what doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot is that it really greatly violates the human rights of Palestinians, as it appears to be an attempt to further isolate Palestinians in the West Bank from the rest of the world. And we'll see a little bit later when we see what sectors are impacted by this, that Palestinian civil society will be greatly damaged by these restrictions, because it will restrict the flow of information from Palestine to the world and vice versa. And this is just sort of you can see a screenshot of what the published document, the title page, looked like, that this is the official document from the Israeli government, procedure for entry and residence of foreigners in Judea and Samaria. The procedure is in Hebrew, originally published in Hebrew, 60 pages, but to give you an idea of how complicated and extensive the procedure is, translated into English, it's 90 pages. And the next part is kind of shocking to me. There's no Arabic version of the procedure. And so we're dealing mainly with, an Arabic-speaking, country, Palestine, the West Bank, and many Arabic speakers are impacted by this, but there is no Arabic version of the document, which is pretty shocking. The different sectors and groups of people that will be impacted, as we said a little bit earlier, American and Palestinian families, lecturers and teachers, doctors, students, anyone wishing to volunteer, employees who will be needing to stay in the West Bank for any period of time, business people, and also journalists. So the original publication that was published in February and was edited slightly in September had even more extensive restrictions on teachers and students specifically, including a quota. Excuse me. And what is interesting is that the government of Israel did walk back that quota. And I think that that can be seen as a sign that pushback on these restrictions and that engagement on this issue can make a difference, because that there was a little bit of an editing for the more onerous, one or two of the more onerous restrictions that were in there. And then also important to note is that Americans with dual nationalities that their other nationalities in a certain country can be excluded from entrance. And then the other thing, like at Rebuilding Alliance, we've been studying these restrictions for a couple of months now. And it's really remarkable that even me personally I feel like I still don't have a full understanding of what is the goal of this and what exactly are they saying. And there's a lot of, and I think one of the reasons is I think they're intentionally being vague with it, because, you know, if you don't think you can get in, maybe you just won't go. And so some of the other sectors and types of people that will be impacted, at least it's signaled that they will be religious pilgrims, athletes and artists, and really a lot of the cultural activities that we're talking about, musicians, artists, athletes, and anyone else that's not specifically listed within the procedures can be denied entry. And one of the just detailing a little bit the restrictions, you'll see the picture there of the King Hussein Bridge border crossing. So that's in Jordan. The new Israeli directives oblige anyone that's only attempting to visit Palestine, so the West Bank, they have to do so through Jordan. So if I was to only wish to visit the West Bank and not visit Israel, I can't fly into Tel Aviv. I have to fly into Jordan, and then if anyone's been there and gone through the Alamy Bridge crossing, I know, Donnie, you have. It's a pretty tough crossing. It's not as simple as just flying into an airport. So that's one of the restrictions placed on people, is if you're only traveling to Palestine, you must go in through Jordan. For people that are seeking visas that would cover work, volunteer, or student visas, those are pretty lengthy processes that require up to 153 days advance notice, as well as really invasive questioning and a questionnaire that must be filled out, and full disclosure of familial or spousal connections to the West Bank. So there's some very invasive questioning about naming your family members in the West Bank. That's part of this process. And then also as a note, which is kind of a caveat to everything, is that the occupation authorities do reserve the right to determine really whether someone can get in, even if they meet the requirements. And they also can determine if your expertise, whether it's work, teaching, or studying, is necessary in the Palestinian territory. So it's really every aspect of life that's being controlled here. A little bit more details of the restrictions. And it looks like I'm at about 25 minutes, so I'll be wrapping up here. As we said earlier, those seeking short-term visas to the West Bank are limited to first-degree relatives. Recognized journalists not working for Palestinian news agencies, so journalists who are working for a news agency that's recognized by Israel, mainly international ones, business people and investors. And then the types of permits that are given to other categories of people for short durations are very complex, and there's lots of renewals that are required. But just in red, you can kind of see the visa requirements for various groups of people. So faculty and student visas, for example, can only be renewed for 27 months. So if you're a student, if you're in a 4-year program, obviously that's very difficult to obtain a degree if you must leave for a period of time before returning. And again, the Israeli authorities do have the right to determine whether or not your program is essential or what you're teaching is essential. As I said before, there's certain nationalities that are barred from entry if you're American and you also have a background in one of these other countries. We actually had a congressional briefing today with Chris Papas's office. He's from the 1st District of New Hampshire. And our guest speaker was American. She was born in America. She did not spend time in any other country, but because her father was Egyptian, she had the privilege of having an Egyptian passport. And she was barred entry from Israel for having an Egyptian passport. So if you're American, but you have another passport, you're treated as if you're from that second country. And so these are the 5 countries: Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Bahrain, and South Sudan. And the irony here is obviously many of these countries have peace agreements with Israel. Egypt and Jordan were 2 of the first countries to do so. So very interesting that that's a specific part of the procedure. One of the last things to talk about, and also one of the most complicated and really heartbreaking things, is how this impacts spouses and family. So one of the reasons that we've heard that this is finally being regularized and put down on paper is to formalize the process of applying for residency for foreign spouses, because there's really no regular process at the moment. But what will happen if this new set of procedures goes into effect is that visas for spouses would only be for 3 months, to be extended for 3 months. And whereas right now, sort of the unwritten rule is that they can be extended for up to 2 years. So what we're going to see is spouses of Palestinians will essentially be treated as tourists and will not really have the right to live with their families. Down towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see the bullet point that remaining in the territories beyond what Israel allows is possible if one submits a request to the Palestinian Authority, and that essentially doesn't happen. The providing request transferred by the Palestinian Authority is not a process that we understand to happen. So the caveat that one could stay in the West Bank longer with their spouse essentially isn't really possible. And there's a specific line in the procedure that says when dealing with humanitarian considerations, one having children in the West Bank or being married to someone in the West Bank, that's not in itself a humanitarian consideration. So really difficult for families to reunite now, and even more so if these procedures are implemented. Donna, I'd like to have you speak now, if you can, about how we're reaching out to other organizations and constituents to engage on this issue. Thanks for listening to me, everyone.
Thanks, Matthew. And I'm imagining that everyone's going to have a ton of questions. It's a lot of material. That procedure that Israel published, I'm moving out of the sunbeam that I was just in. The procedure that they published is 90 pages, and it's not all that linear. It really does. Hopefully, we can block its implementation in October. It was withdrawn from September's implementation. It was supposed to go into effect in June. It was held up till September. It did change a bit in September. Oops, let me make sure my camera's on. And then it's been held up again into October. And so we'd really be honored, everyone there on the line, take a moment to search for Rebuilding Alliance and Action Network, and you'll see this campaign right on the main page. You can go ahead and sign a letter to all of your members of Congress as we speak. It's the letter it's an email to them. It's not a petition. It's an email between you and them, but Action Network is a wonderful tool that will let you lets you send the email and tells us that you sent it. Why is that important? Because as we schedule briefings with them, we want to invite you to join the Zoom calls. These are 30-minute briefings. Lately, there've been about 5 a day, and members of congressional offices, senior staff. Sometimes it's the chief of staff. Sometimes it's the legislative director. Often it's the senior staff for foreign policy. We really take heart that we are being heard. And then what makes it possible for them to actually do their phone calls? It's you being on the line. You with your member of Congress staff, they can listen to outsiders, and they'll do so politely at their own interest. but when a constituent's on the line, when 3 constituents call or write, when 5 or 10 or 15 write in, that means that they'll definitely flag this to their boss. They'll definitely ask for permission to make the follow-up calls. So that's why it's just vital. We can see how the dynamics change when constituents join, and also it's really fun to see, like the Virginians and the Connecticut folk, and also people in New Hampshire are just, they're there in a heartbeat to join these briefings with their members of Congress. They're also a little bit surprised because a lot of times you may or may not be getting access, and when we organize the briefing, we're bringing in a guest speaker from overseas, someone from the West Bank, Jerusalem, an American who's been through some of this, the lawyer for the case. There's 2 lawyers, and the Israeli human rights group Hamoked are appealing these rules. So they're also speaking. We've got about 12 guest speakers, one on, you don't want to overwhelm anyone, so we've make sure that, we ask everyone who's speaking to be doing 2 a week. Is this something that that WILPF Detroit would like to do with us?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question. Actually, I had a couple questions before I answer that. Is there any point in contacting an outgoing congressional representative? Because in my district, I'm with someone who's leaving, or I could definitely contact the one who's definitely going to be elected. The reason I'm asking is, well, my other question too is, are you also focusing any efforts on Arab American communities like in Michigan, in California?
Yeah, the American Federation of Ramallah Palestine signed on as a partner for this. And so all of the Ramallah clubs across the country are beginning to hear about it. I might be even traveling to go meet with them in person. And their national meeting is going to be in Westland. And I have good reason to come back to Michigan anytime. So I'd really like to help, spread the word there in person if possible. And does it count? So maybe you're in Andy Levin's district and rough primaries, man. Yes, it counts. There's a deadline coming up. I think Congress works best when there's a deadline. It's October 20th. Andy Levin is still there, and any others who are transitioning, they're still there. They count. Their voices count. Congress, the State Department has to respond to them. The Israeli embassy has set up a type of a relationship with Rebuilding Alliance. They promised that they would, they promised that whenever a member of Congress calls them, at our request or anyone's request, that they will channel that request over to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel and get them an answer. So good to see that there is some sort of traction. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the current acting Prime Minister of Israel is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, or still Minister of Foreign Affairs and Prime Minister. So good that we've got that access. Is it going to be enough? Well, they're going to need a lot of calls and many different offices. So I do think that, I also personally think that anyone who's not staying in Congress has more latitude to say what they really think. So hopefully he's doing that, and by all means ask. You are still being represented until they change and leave office.
And just to add on to that was one of the things that I hadn't considered until fairly recently was that, most of our Zoom calls are with senior level staff. And so even if the member of Congress isn't reelected, the member of the staff, he or she will end up in another representative's office. And so if you engage the staffer on an issue and it's something they care about, it's also sort of an investment in them down the line. They'll end up in another office, and it's possible that they'll engage with their new boss on these issues too. So I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's
a really
important.
good point. And we learned a lot on our leadership learning mission by the last one, we brought 7 staff, including chiefs of staff and legislative directors. I, I was a little surprised. The chief of staff for one of the congressmen from Pennsylvania, he said that he really manages 90% of the issues on behalf of the congressman. So 90% of the time, the question doesn't even get to his boss. He's able to manage it directly. So again, I think the investment in the staff is worthwhile, like Matthew said.
Now, I have another question, but I'd like to see if anybody else has a question. You can raise your hand physically or using the icon, or put your question in the chat. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, I'm maybe mispronounced your name, Olone. Please answer.
Ohlone. That's Ohlone Indians.
Please answer. Thank you.
This is Greg, though. I should change that. Matthew, could you give an example of how the policy of not recognizing families work for Palestinian couples separated or wanting to get back together, how it works for their spouses and children?
Yeah, so just I can actually give an example from the congressional briefing that we had today. The person I mentioned, our guest speaker, she's American. She has an Egyptian background. She went to Palestine for work maybe 6 or 7 years ago. She stayed there and studied at Bethlehem University and got her master's degree there. She met her future husband while she was studying. They got married. She obviously was done with her studies. She did not have a student visa or a visa of any kind, so she couldn't stay there. She came to the U.S. and her husband was able to come with her for a while. They had issues with immigration. He didn't get a green card, so they decided they were going to go back to the West Bank. Like I said before, many spouses are essentially treated as tourists. So it was a very complicated and long story, but essentially she thought she could fly into Tel Aviv because she's American. Her husband, of course, had to fly into Jordan and cross via land through Jordan and into the West Bank. What she found when she went to the airport was, this was during COVID, Israel was not allowing any children in whatsoever. So her child then had to go be with her husband and enter through Jordan. She was then denied entry in Tel Aviv and deported to Istanbul and then deported back to the United States. So essentially, if you're not Palestinian, if you're American like this woman was, you are not allowed to be with your spouse legally in the West Bank. As kind of touched on a little bit, there's unofficial and unwritten procedures that have been in effect the last couple of years that are fairly inconsistent. But most families that apply for, and Donna, maybe you can help me out on the name of the Hebrew family reunification. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but Lev Shema, family reunification. They wait. It's a waiting game. They aren't given legal status to live with their husbands or their wives. Donna, if you want to follow up on that one. Yeah, or their children. So many times the children will stay with oftentimes it's the mother in the US or whatnot, but Donna, feel free to add on to that.
Yeah, or their children. There is a carve out or an exception for humanitarian emergency, but it's defined that parent of child is not an emergency. It's not a humanitarian need. It's not an exception that's allowed under these rules.
Is there an age bracket that defines children? Is it different than it is here?
I mean, Russia, who is speaking today, has a baby and she was breastfeeding. You'd think that that would have defined her ability to be reunited, and it wasn't.
Wow.
And we're also hearing that in the new procedure, it specifically says that I think the cutoff is 16. So a 17 or 18-year-old child could not, still a child in our minds in the United States up to 18. Right, Donna, there was a cutoff at 16 for being able to travel and visit family in Palestine.
Okay, good.
And then it allows for direct relations to get the temporary, really a tourist visa, but not aunties, uncles, not grandparents, like we've mentioned, like no others. And you'd almost think by reading the description that maybe then you just have to apply 45 days in advance. But actually it doesn't allow, there's no category. Like, according to this current version of the rules that would be implemented, there is really nothing that gives a sense that there of any process at all. Just pretty. I maybe we should take heart in some odd way that at last this stuff is being written down. Rebuilding Alliance's one of our founding board members wrote an article back in, I think, 2006 or 2007 when we first began to see these rules applied. And his article was, "I want to keep my wife," because his Swiss wife would be not allowed to stay according to the rules. She would then, for the next, every 3 months, for all these years, has to leave the country and reapply to be able to stay in his family, is to live together. And it wasn't written down. It surprised me that during this time when the visa waiver program is gaining some traction, why would onerous rules be published? But when you read the rules carefully, you see that it says that these are only rules that apply with countries that provide visa waiver programs. So very important on your side as constituents to really push and ask your members of Congress to check in with the State Department. Are they paying attention to this? Are they going to also require, assure that American law, that it be a reciprocal arrangement? Are they going to make sure that it's reciprocal for Americans going to the West Bank, reciprocal for Americans entering Israel from the West Bank? What about Gaza even? Make sure that these issues are part of those reciprocal requirements for the visa waiver program.
I have a question, a couple of them, and I've really learned a lot in a very short time. Thank you, Matthew and Donna. Is there a reason for this? Like, was this formally announced when it was written up and evidently now being distributed? Was it announced? And if it was announced, was a reason given?
I mean, that's a big question. That was what I was wondering. Like, why in this time, when there's traction on the visa waiver question, would Israel publish restrictions that are so outrageous? Why now? Why? I think it came out in March when it was first published to be implemented, I believe in June, May or June. And we know that the president has mentioned a number of times that they're working on a 3-year process of evaluating Israel for the visa waiver program. So why announce it now? And I don't know the answer to that. Did someone give an assurance that it doesn't count? Did they feel that unless they write it down now, they won't be able to continue doing what they've done without writing it down at all? Did they feel that inside Israel's political sphere, which is so complicated with elections coming up and very right-wing takeover inside of their government, was it necessary to put forward these rules? You'll hear an argument about the demographics. Palestinians to Israelis and the numbers of population growth, and whether a democracy can function, whether Israel passed its rules and basic law saying that that I won't even be able to say it correctly. It's that Jewish Israelis have priority. That's been codified into Israeli law. When you look at the demographic argument, and I've heard this said, maybe that was the reason why this comes up now. There is certainly, as I began to learn more about it, it was in 2017 when these unwritten rules became even more difficult, where families were being impacted. And I was invited by that board member, the founding board member of Rebuilding Alliance, to go to an open forum in Ramallah. And I thought, okay, a few thousand people must be impacted, maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000. I was really shocked at the time, this is 2017, to hear that 45,000 families were already impacted by the unwritten rules that were being applied at that time. 45,000, probably maybe half of which are American. So these are mixed couples where one is Palestinian and the other is from another nationality. These numbers are very high. And then now we're seeing that regulation brought forward in print. What we should be getting is a response from everyone in Congress to be shocked. Now it's written down.
Yeah.
Now the discrimination is very clear. And we should be hearing over and over from every office, oh my goodness, how did this happen? Why is it occurring? And I hope that will happen by us bringing it forward in detail. I hope that will be their response. And if it's not, how come it wouldn't be? When did we ever think this was okay? How did it happen that it could happen for so many years, that this level of discrimination could be ongoing and become almost normal? So it's some important.
And for most of us not to know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to propose that we move to the next part of the program. But first, I want to thank you two for all this information. Like Judith said, I didn't know about it either. I'm going to propose to our branch that we organize meetings with Debbie Dingle, and Haley Stevens. And Rashida Tlaib probably does not need a meeting, but we'll tell her that this is what we want. And Brenda Lawrence, who is an outgoing representative. But my question would be, have you already met with these Congress people already? And if you have, should we still ask for a meeting?
Great. Matthew, do you know the schedule?
Yeah, we actually don't have, I'm going to say we do not have any Michigan reps that have followed up with us on this. I don't think we've met with any so far, and I don't see any on the calendar. So
Okay.
Definitely.
Then we will, I pledge to make that happen. We'll put a couple on the calendar. We have some peace groups in the area who probably would want to participate also. Now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to put this link in the chat again. It's a link to the letter itself. And Bob asked if we could just put that on the screen share. So I will do that. And so here's what if you click on that link, you're going to come to this page, Action Network. And you're going to be, my name is already there because they've got my name. So I'm going to start writing. And what we'd like to do, we got to help them get to 10,000 letters. Now, when you originally said that, I didn't realize you did mean electronic letters like this, correct?
Yes, emails.
Great, just like this. So you just do what they say. I'm going to give them my phone number.
These are required by each office. So it's
exactly
whatever the preface of the office asks for.
So you just type all that in. And then when you get your to the part where the letter actually pops up, you can change it So now, of course, here's the funny thing, letter topic. So anyway, this is what you got to do. And then when you're all done with that, here's the letter, and feel free to change it as needed. I know for me, I'm going to add something about my daughter, because my daughter is born in America. Her dad was Palestinian. She went there a few years ago to volunteer for an agency, and she was working for refugee children at a summer camp. That's all she did, help entertain the kids in a summer camp. If she had gone, and it took her all day to get through the security, today she might not have been able to do that. So I'm going to put that in my letter, because I feel this. Another concern, I don't know if this letter addresses it specifically, but what about aid groups? Could United Nations volunteers be denied entry? That's another concern I have. There are so many aid groups in there, like the one Meta Peace Team from Michigan. They are set to send a team there, I believe, in 2023, because they had a call for volunteers. Will they be turned away? So anyway, I just urge everybody to, right now, let's take a few minutes together, go into that link and send your letters, and add your own personal touch. And if you don't mind, let's take a few minutes right now to do that, because what I've often found is if you don't do it right away, it doesn't happen. So we're going to do that. If people want to chat, they can. I'm going to go to my letter and finish it up. And the other thing is, I did put in the phone numbers of Peters and Sabinow. What you could do is, after you send the letter tonight, tomorrow or the next day, call their staff and say, did you see my letter? And if they say no, in fact, what you might want to do is, before you send it, copy and paste that to a Word doc, or if you want, I have a Word doc where I put in, send it to them, send it to the staffer and say, this is what I wrote your boss, and please follow up. So these are the phone numbers. You can write them down or look them up online. Okay, I'm going to shut up for a minute because I cannot talk and write at the same time. That's beyond me. And if anyone wants to chat, go ahead.
Just
Yeah,
those
Matthew.
purposes you can put in international, or you can put in civil rights. All of those would count. That's something that they're requiring on their side.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'd asked Matthew privately in the chat, but Matthew or Donna, if you have anything that could be shared that could explain this, that each of us could send out people that we know to encourage them to do the same thing.
Oh, great. We do. We'll be sending out a thank you email, and more than happy to include, a little brief about it, and, something you can forward. And also, as you're finishing your letter, it should get you to tools that will let you, you can embed the letter. It should let you share, in the last part on the thank you, it'll give you a place where you can share, and there should be some wording right there that let you share it on Facebook or let you share it on in an email. All of that can work.
I was going to ask if we'll follow up with materials when we send out a thank you email to WILPF. Was everyone's email captured when they signed up to do this event, or should we have like a sign up list so everyone can receive an email from us?
Yeah, let's do a sign up. Let's do a sign up. The reason is we did not require registration for this event. Usually we do, and then we can capture emails. So we didn't do that. So if everyone wants to put their email address in the chat, and then Matthew and Donna could capture that, or, and then that would be very useful. The other thing you could do is send an email to wilpfdetroit at att.net, and we can send a list to Matthew. All right, does that sound good?
What's our topic area here?
So
Sure, Americans' fair entry to Palestine would be a
No, that we have to select it.
It's usually foreign affairs
international
or
foreign,
something like that.
international affairs, foreign affairs, civil
Okay.
rights could be fine.
I thought of civil rights. Okay, thank you.
It does affect Americans, so civil rights is entirely reasonable.
yeah,
And that usually signifies which staff area, which staff it's assigned to for follow-up. One thing that's been really fascinating is to see how many offices have joined us for briefings. And I, Matthew, I almost suggest that you share screen for just 1 second to show them what it looks like on the scheduling
Sure.
page.
Yeah. Let's see.
We noticed during COVID, like last summer or so, that all of a sudden, like 200 offices would reply when we sent a request for meetings. So this is what the schedule looks like just for this campaign. We launched in the beginning of September, a little bit in the end of August, and this is Republican and Democrat. So really quite impressive to see. Every single member of Congress promises their constituent that they will intervene for them with regard to an urgent issue and when it involves a federal agency. Every single one has that promised on their website. And indeed, for those who are actually experiencing this discrimination, Rebuilding Alliance will be coaching them how to fill out the forms that are on the website to engage that office and further interact on this for their particular case. But because they're promising that, this isn't lobbying, this is about influence. We're asking them, really, so often as friends of Israel, it's the friends don't let friends drive drunk strategy. They, as friends of Israel, should be able to call and ask for reconsideration of something that's just plain wrong.
I wondered what would happen, what would happen if a person who is Jewish wanted to go to the West Bank?
If they want to go to a settlement, they probably have no problem at all. But we have so many, and we made sure that our congressional delegation met with many of people who are American, Jewish American, living in Israel, who are in solidarity with Palestinians, often living in Palestinian villages, that they were part of our trip in describing their experience. The discrimination against them is happening too. They're being beaten up by settlers, and then the Jewish Americans, when Sam Stein was arrested, and when he reported it to the police that he was beaten up, he was being arrested. So really bizarre and dangerous, and important that they have the members of Congress standing beside them. Like make sure that they have the intervention of their representatives and senators.
Donna, so if we're able to schedule a meeting with one of our congressional representatives, does somebody from Rebuilding Alliance want to be there?
Sure, we'll help you every which way we can.
Okay.
So go ahead and schedule, because you as constituents are the strongest possible schedulers. We do a good job, and your job you're doing, you should have their full attention immediately. And we're happy to put together any level of resource that you need. If you want the guest speaker, another page to share would be that speakers page, so you can see like really the remarkable caliber of speakers that have joined us. And we'll be happy to help you schedule the speaker. If you want us to engage, and we can invite the constituents who sent letters to join you, we're happy to do that. That would be part of, if you're partnering with us, or if you just want to do it on a one-off basis, we're happy to do any of that. Sure, please call us. We'd be honored. And you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, I'm going to stop the recording.